Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there lived a group of witches and wizards who guarded an ancient power known as the Cauldron of Souls. This magical artifact had the power to raise the dead and control the souls of those it had claimed. The witches and wizards lived in a small village nestled deep in the forest, far from the prying eyes of the mortal world. They were a tight-knit community, bound by their shared knowledge and respect for the Cauldron of Souls. But one day, a traveling merchant stumbled upon their hidden village and was intrigued by the tales of the Cauldron of Souls he heard from the residents there. Determined to possess this ancient power for himself, the merchant set out to steal the cauldron from the witches and wizards who had guarded it for centuries. As night fell and the merchants crept into the village, the witches and wizards were ready to defend their precious possession at all costs. A fierce battle ensued as the merchant tried to use his wealth and cunning to outwit his opponents, while the witches and wizards used their magic to protect the Cauldron of Souls from falling into the wrong hands. As the battle raged on, the villagers grew weary and feared for their lives and their village's future without the protection of the Cauldron of Souls and its guardian. They had grown to love and trust, even when that trust was sometimes misplaced or misguided, but that's another story for another time. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost for the witches and wizards and a stalemate had been reached, the merchant not been able to breach the village walls and the guardians unable to capture the traitorous thief. Out of the shadows stepped a small, innocent-looking witchling, as she was called by the people who knew her best and loved her best, even though she had all of the knowledge of the universe stored up in her head. And she was armed with a wickedly sweet smile, and a wicked sweet tooth too. As she approached the scene of the battle, in her silly little witch hat and her patched-up cloak, the young witchling began to sing a little song with a voice so sweet that it could charm the birds out of the trees and make them stop fighting each other for their food. And as she sang, the villagers began to relax and smile. Even the merchant had to stop fighting and just listen and enjoy the little tuneful performance. But the witchling didn't stop there. She conjured up a storm of butterflies with vibrant colors that landed everywhere and began to flutter all over the battlefield like a beautiful living piece of art. And then, the young witchling turned her gaze upon the wicked merchant and said with a smile that could melt even the coldest heart, "You don't want to do this anymore, do you? Come with me and I'll show you a more peaceful way to live." And with that, the merchant stopped in his tracks and looked around at the beautiful scene around him. And he realized that there were more important things for him than power and greed. And so it was that the little witchling showed everyone that day that even the tiniest among us has the power to change the world. And the villagers rejoiced that they had such a brave and powerful ally in their midst. And the merchant went on to start a new life in the village where he could learn about peace and friendship. As for the little witchling, she went back to her quiet little cottage at the edge of the forest where she always went to think and draw and write in her journal. And when the villagers came to visit her, they would find her surrounded by all the animals of the forest who had come to love her as much as they loved and protected their own children. And of course, there was always room for them at her table for a midnight snack or a cup of tea. But best yet, she would share stories about her life as a guardian of the Cauldron of Souls and how it was meant to be a source of healing and protection for all souls. And so it was that the power of this little witchling's kindness and selflessness saved the day. And the land became a peaceful place where everyone was free to be themselves. The end.